Hi, and thanks for joining me. This is Janet Perez with the Painted Saguaro, and I'm working today with Paint Couture to show you how to create a beautiful piece of furniture out of this Henredon Amoire. The first thing I'm doing is I'm adding the Farmhouse Linen in the Paint Couture chalk style paint into the recesses of each of these little squares on the front of this Amoire. And that's because I'm going to be doing some decoupage to it in a little bit, and I want it to be on a white background. Now I'm adding some Saltwash to Pink Grapefruit Perfect Pigments and the Farmhouse Linen. I'm mixing it to get just the right pop of pink, and you'll see that I'm going to be adding this sporadically over the piece, over the wood, in order to create an undercoat for my final layer. So as you can see, I'm adding the Saltwash to the pink that I've created using that Farmhouse Linen chalk style paint and the Perfect Pigments Pink Grapefruit, and just randomly placing it in places because I want that pink to kind of pop through in spots with my final steps. And there's no rhyme or reason to this. It really is just something that you do kind of by feel. Once I have the pink strategically placed everywhere I want it, on the front as well as the sides, I'm going to come in with some Basil chalk style paint and add some texture to that with the Saltwash. And again, as I've said before in previous videos, you want the consistency of your paint and Saltwash, or whatever texture medium you're using, to be sort of a texture of brownie batter. So once I've got it thoroughly mixed, I'm going to again place it sporadically. I don't want to overlap the pink, but I want this textured green to kind of fill in some of the blank spots on that natural wood. Now I've got all of the green and the pink down, I'm going to add some of Abyss chalk style paint by Paint Couture, and I'm going to fill in all of those brown spots of natural wood that are still popping through. Mixing it with texture medium again and stirring it up really good because you don't want any little white chunks coming through. Again, the consistency of brownie batter, and I'm just filling in those spots that are still wanting some paint. I want to add here that I'm using a chip brush, and I'm using the chip brush because adding texture to any piece of furniture is really rough on your brush, and you want to use the cheapest chippy brush you can find because you don't care about them. They're disposable after a few uses, although I like to use them multiple times because the more worn they get, the better texture you get. And now we are going to start covering all of this beautiful camouflage work with some pitch black chalk style paint by Paint Couture. This is probably the most luxurious, rich black I have ever laid my hands on, and I've tried every brand to paint, you guys. And what I'm doing here is I'm using an artist brush, and I'm just going around the frame of each of those inset areas that is going to contain decoupage paper, because I want to make sure that when I put the paper down, I don't have any white peeking through. So here we go, we're just finishing it up, and now I am adding that same pitch black to the entire piece, except for the white, of course. And there's no texture in this paint because the texture is going to be all underneath it. I'm just laying down a light coat of the black, and you'll notice when you're painting over chalk paint, sometimes with a second layer, even if it's the same color, it'll start to drag your brush a little bit. So just use your Mister bottle and spritz it lightly, and that helps the paint really move across the wood much nicer. And you extend your paint tremendously by doing that, and you don't get it on too thick as well. So I'm going to cover this entire piece with this pitch black, and then we'll move on to the next step. So the black has been added to all of the areas that I wanted it on, and now I'm taking some 220 grit sandpaper and I'm just very lightly rubbing over the black because I want those colors that we laid down beneath it to pop out. You can't really see it until you get the top coat on, but you're going to see those little hints of pink, of blue, and of green once this is all done, and it really does create a really cool effect. I don't know if you remember when you were in grade school, but you would do the crayon colors on a piece of paper and then paint black tempera paint over it and then scrape off the black paint to create a pattern. And that's sort of the effect you get here. So here's the paper that I'm using, and I've cut it down into squares to fit those little areas that it's going to go into. I've used blue painter's tape to tape each piece up so that I'm sure to have the right piece in the right place. And I'm using the Paint Couture top coat as my adhesive for decoupaging this product in. And as you can see, I'm using I don't even know what it's called, a blade with velvet on one end, and some saran wrap to get the piece flat, get all the wrinkles and the bubbles out of it. So I'm adding the top coat, making sure that I've got an ample amount on there, putting the piece of paper down, making sure that it's square and in the right place. And that's the really cool thing when you're using top coat is you can lift it and set it back down at least one or two more times before it will start to stick too much. And then you press it down with the saran wrap because the saran wrap protects the paper from the blade. So I'm just moving along here through each square, and it doesn't matter if you get the top coat on the outside of the area either because the whole thing's going to be top coated eventually, so it just makes it super easy to use. So again, you use the saran wrap, press it down real good into the corners, make sure you've got it secure and that it's adhered everywhere and there's no wrinkles, and move on to the next one. And when you're done with a few of the squares, you can actually add the more top coat over it while the paper is still wet, and that helps prevent wrinkles as well. There's a lot of tips and tricks to applying decoupage paper, but I've found that this is probably one of the most effective things to do because it creates a really smooth, perfect finish. At least for me it does. So I'm just going to continue adhering this paper into these little squares, and once we're done with that, then it's all finished pretty much. I'm going to top coat it with the Paint Couture matte finish top coat, and here's some close-ups of those squares, and you can see the colors peeking through. You see some pink and some green there. It's really just the coolest effect, you guys. There's the blue. I even have a little bit of wood showing through in some spots just because I like that effect. Like right there's some wood, you can see it. So thank you for following along with me. Again, this is Janet Perez with the Painted Saguaro, along with Paint Couture and all of our Paint Couture products. I'm happy that you joined us and hope you'll catch us again next time on the Paint Couture channel.